Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast. My name is Thomas Vick, one of the co-hosts. Seth Wilson joins me, the other co-host of this great podcast. Seth, how's it going today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Thomas. It was fun. I actually got to see you live and in person this week. Earlier this week, you were presenting at a seminar, and I thought that went really well in terms of the content that was shared and just a good educational evening overall. So it was fun to connect outside of the digital world as well and see how things are going. So that was
Yeah,
fun. How about you?
we're taking the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer Podcast on the road these days. That's two public speaking opportunities that I've had that you've been in attendance, and it's always great to have you in attendance and support and all of that, and kind of field some of the questions that come up. That was kind of neat that you were able to field some questions that some of the attendees had. But yeah, we had a great night at Stone Creek in Greenwood, and well attended, and lots of good attention was paid, and a lot of good questions were asked. So hope to have some more opportunities like that in the future. Laura's Financial, which is a company that is in my building here in Greenwood, they invited me to speak and sort of was the host of the seminar, and it was really good. It was a really good opportunity to speak with Chris Mullins and everybody that's involved. So it was good.
Yeah, it was really well done from that standpoint as well, and just really a great opportunity to remove the barrier to entry to ask some of these questions, right? Not all the time do you need to go consult with a lawyer, but maybe you have a question that you've always wanted to ask a lawyer. And so I think these types of events are really helpful to ask that threshold question of, do I really need more of a formal consultation, or I was just curious about this and how it worked. And more, it's interesting as I listen to conversations. Folks are, well, I've got this probate scenario and I didn't understand how this worked or that worked. And I wasn't expecting this result. And boy, why isn't it simpler over here? And it's just fascinating, because you and I live in this world day in and day out, but there's still so many people who are experiencing an estate or probate issue for the first time. And there's lots of questions. So big reason why we do the podcast is to try and help educate on those issues. And these events are great for that as well, to really hone in sometimes on those more specific questions, even if we don't need to get involved.
Yeah, kind of demystifying some of the things you hear about probate, and just informing the public. That's what we're trying to do, so that people can make better decisions for themselves and their families. And part of that, as we often mention, is the blog digest that I send out to my clients on my email list each week. And we got several topics to choose from that will be coming out this week. And one of the topics this week is going to be, how do you do estate planning for family landowners? So we're talking about farms and big tracts of land that might have been inherited from generation after generation after generation. And so that's one of the topics that will be in the blog digest this week. And I'll just kind of open it up to you, Seth. And where do we go from here when it comes to family land ownership?
Well, I thought you were teeing me up with that reference of fielding questions, because a lot of times you're talking about potentially some farmland and fields that may be associated with that. And so really it's a big topic of concern, especially as you think about the legacy portion of the land. And it may have been in the family for a long time, or the goal is to keep it in the family for a long time. And there may be different generations that are associated with the activities on that land, if it's farming, for example. And so that it really starts there, I think, of understanding, like, how is it currently being utilized? Who are the deeded owners of the land? We've had many situations over the years where you've had to go back and help figure out, how do we get title to the current owners, because grandpa owned it and great uncle owned it, and there was just different things that may have happened, and maybe no probate was opened up at that time or no survivor deed or anything. So that's really kind of the first step, is really just figuring out what do we have, and where do we want that to go. And that kind of talks about, your article talks about that deed situation. It's always good to review that and understand where that is, and then start thinking about what should we do with it.
Yeah, and that's a reminder that when there is a death in the family, to get those real estate records updated. Nobody's going to be knocking on your door and saying, hey, you've got to get this updated. But, and especially for a tract of land that has been in the family and is just going to stay in the family, nobody's going to tell you that you need to, talk to an attorney and get, an affidavit of survivorship or a devolution affidavit to update the chain of title. So that's a great point, and a great starting place as well, because you're able to figure out who all does the attorney need to represent, or do I need to represent a particular child in the family, and everybody kind of has their own representation. That's sort of where my mind is going with the next step of, is everybody agreeable to doing some kind of estate plan together if there are multiple owners to the property? Perhaps, the grandfather had, was the sole owner of 200 acres, just throwing out numbers, and then 3 sons, and then those 3 sons have kids. Who now is the legal owner? And, there may be multiple parties that are involved. And from an attorney's perspective, I'm asking, am I going to be representing the joint venture, or am I going to just represent one of the individuals involved?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because it kind of ties into then that next transition. You've kind of taken care of the prior transition that maybe put that property under your responsibility and ownership. But what does it look like next as we go to the next group of owners? And the digest answers part of that question via maybe a transfer on death designation, which you can do via transfer on death deed on a parcel of real estate. But in that scenario, now we have joint owners. And what if one of those joint owners would rather have the land developed, where one of the joint owners wants to keep it as farmland? Now you've got a situation where you're going to potentially subject that next generation to some sort of partition action, where their interests are going to be adverse. And so that's really a key assessment that the lawyer would have to do on the front end, to say, I don't know that I can represent all these interests, because you may all have disagreements, and that would put the lawyer in a conflict position. But also just trying to figure out, okay, what are the pitfalls potentially of this plan moving forward, to make sure that we can retain the intent of the owner in their transition. Hey, we wanted to keep this as family farmland. How do we do that?
Yeah, and as we're thinking about the current landowners and advising a current landowner what to do with the land and the farm, it's helpful to understand who the key person is. So the key person may be the son that lives just, 2 doors down and farms the land. And he's really the one that is taking care of it. And the other kids may not be involved. So is there a way that we can craft a plan where maybe the other kids get a principal residence and the bank accounts, and the son that is the farmer, he gets the farm, and that's what's going to be beneficial to him? Maybe you need to have some kind of compromise as far as that's concerned, and plan around who the key person is if the farm is going to stay in the family. I think that would probably be the next step, is identifying the key person, and then from there you kind of start to get creative about, how do I transfer this property, to the next generation? Do I transfer the property to a trust right now while I'm living? Do I wait? Do I want a life estate interest? Do I want to put it in an LLC? We got all of these vehicles that we can use to do estate planning. So how about we kind of go through that and go through some of the ways that we can do planning, and talk about each one in turn.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, we already kind of gave the first one, which is that transfer on death designation. And then, like I said, that can work. And if everybody's in agreement, great. But if there is a scenario where we need to do some sort of equalization or offsetting, gifting, that deed may not be the most ideal scenario, unless it's just transfer on death to the eventual owner of the property. So that's part one. And the other consideration that came to mind when you were talking, let's use the LLC as an example, which an LLC is a limited liability company. It's a very flexible company structure that can be used to hold and retain assets like land, and then you can identify through an operating agreement how the various interests or owners of that LLC are going to operate. And so once you put that plan together, it becomes its own separate entity, and the LLC takes on a life of its own, subject to agreement of the operating members, they're called, and the operating agreement itself. And so the operating agreement should have different terms inside of it that govern who's responsible for it. What happens if somebody wants to be removed from the LLC? Who has access to the information? How can we make sure that the communication between the members is done correctly, and the accounting and the division of any assets or proceeds that may be there? Who gets to decide when and if to sell the property? What are the terms on which you can do that? Does it have to be unanimous? Do you want to use majority vote, a super majority vote? There's all kinds of ways you can structure how that would work, and you don't want to overcomplicate it, but you don't want to not address some of those vital situations. So the LLC is a very flexible tool that's there, but it does have to be set up correctly and has to account for both a business kind of on operating side and a continuity side from a succession plan, because that's where a lot of what I've seen anyway in my practice is where these family farm companies kind of break down, is when it hands off from one generation to the next generation, and the next generation doesn't have the same key person interest that you were talking about.
Yeah, and so if the farmer puts the farm into an LLC while he's living, he may be the sole member of that LLC, and everything is fine. And maybe there's 100 membership units in that LLC. Some would say 100 shares of stock or whatever, 100 membership units, and he's the sole owner of those. And he can craft an estate plan that will transfer all of those, membership units to the kids. And then the kids will, if there are 3 kids, maybe it's 33 and a third to each one of them. And now they have voting shares, and they're able to decide how the LLC is going to operate in the future. But you've kind of set up a system where they can handle their ownership interest in the farm, and really set them up to be able to do their estate planning for their next generation. That's really where I see an LLC being most beneficial, is because you can set it in motion, and then now all these succeeding generations will have an interest in the farm, and they won't be doing deed work at each generation. It'll just be updating the LLC operating agreement and membership units and all of those things.
Great tools, but again, they have to be crafted appropriately, much like a trust would. So you can put the property into a trust and assign a trustee or co-trustees or what have you to manage that property going on. But the property's in a trust, and so you're going to have an ongoing trust where that is going to take on its own EIN number and become its own entity, and then it may have some tax implications that are not as beneficial, shall we say, as an LLC or an ongoing company might be. The tax structure of a trust is probably going to be at a higher tax bracket than putting that property in someone's name via transfer on death or into that LLC and running it through that way. So just something to keep in mind as those assets are transitioned from one generation to the other. But I think a big piece of it is not just the financial piece, but the decision-making piece. And so you've got to be cognizant of who's going to make the decisions, how are they going to make the decisions? How are they communicating with their siblings a lot of times, which, we all grew up in households, so we know how that can be both good and a challenge at a time. So you just want to kind of be thinking about all of those little things, because at the time when everything gets set up, it's good. It's later when something happens or someone makes a decision that you don't agree with. How do you handle it when there's some sort of tension in the relationship?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and just understanding the family dynamics and talking to the client about his or her family. That's really part of what we do as estate planners, is kind of understanding what is happening underneath the surface, and how are we able to plan for that. So transfer on death deed is one way of doing it. LLC is one way. Maybe just a revocable trust is one way to do it. Maybe we're not concerned about, asset protection per se, but we're really just concerned about making it a smooth transition from one generation to the next. And we can make sure that the farm doesn't get caught up in a probate estate by placing it into a revocable trust. And the owner of the farm or owners of the farm can be the trustees of the trust while they're living, and there's really no change that needs to be made as far as the operations of the farm, but you're avoiding probate. And if something were to happen to one of the beneficiaries of the trust, then the trust can kind of plan for that. Say the key person that is going to take care of the farm, receive the farm, he becomes disabled. Well, what happens with the farm? Well, we can have a special needs trust that's set up for that individual. Or maybe an adult child predeceases, and now the grandkids are going to take a little while before they're of the age of majority, and the trust can hold on to the farm while they're growing up. So you got that's a more typical estate planning kind of thing, but don't want to forget about it when it comes to estate planning for a farm. So a revocable trust might be an option.
Yeah. So great options there. And I think kind of the key takeaways listed on your blog digest are really important. Like the whole point here is we want to figure out the best tool and approach to help maximize that legacy asset for future generations. And you want to do so in a way that is in a good stewardship model. So maximize the value that's associated with it, and work it well, and take that, all the hard work and the longevity associated with that legacy property, and pass that on in the tools around it in a good way to the future generations. And I think your last one of seek professional help, because there's just such a myriad of issues to walk through that counsel, I think, can be really helpful for you as you walk through that process, because sometimes you've seen one part of the picture, but you now need to go 360 degrees and look all the way around it, instead of just, my oldest is the farmer, so we'll just have him handle everything. Well, there's a different mentality sometimes with someone looking to farm it than someone looking to develop it for a subdivision. And, that may not be in keeping with the intent of what that asset was built for. And so, while it's yours and you can control what happens to it, you want to make sure that you do that and communicate that in a way that protects that legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. One that I hadn't really mentioned very much is a life estate. A life estate would be an option as well. Putting it into giving a remainder interest to maybe the adult kids, and then you retain a life estate so that the farm can continue to be yours while you're living, and then it just passes by operation of law to the kids as well. So I wanted to throw that one in there, since I'd mentioned it, but didn't really talk about it very much. But lots of options, and seek the guidance and expertise of estate planning attorneys that do this kind of thing on a regular basis, and whoever it is going to be able to guide you in the right way.
Yeah, agreed. And really that would be the caution, just from an educational standpoint, that a lot of times if you're forming the business, especially if it's that initial LLC, the thought is, well, I'll get to the succession part later. I'll just get this going and then we'll deal with that. Make sure you deal with that component, because that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen in our practice, where these LLCs are in theory a very powerful tool, but in practice they become a bit of a challenge for folks because they weren't clearly defined as to who can do what and when. And you need to address each of those issues and buyouts and valuations and all kinds of stuff that are associated with it that you may not be thinking about it when everything's good. And then when things change, now you need to have those rules of the road, so to speak, for how to handle those variations in life.
Yeah, very good, very good. Good discussion today about how to do some estate planning for farmland and other real estate. Seth, what's the best way people can get in touch with you?
Well, Thomas, we are located here in the heart of Hamilton County, Indiana, in the county seat of Noblesville, and that's our web address, noblesvilleattorney.com. How about yourself?
The best way to get in touch with me is by going to vicklaw.org and click on Book a Call, vicklaw.org, and book a call. That's all I got for today, Seth. We'll see everybody next time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Thomas.